Now we're going to work the tails, and I'm going to show you how to add an edge trim. My trim was a little bit wide. I cut it down to 1.5 centimeters or half an inch at the widest part, and that gives me a foot width seam allowance, and I have a little bit of the edge left standing. If you use lace that's only 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch wide, then what you want to do is use the markings on your pattern to tell you exactly where the lace needs to sit on. Yeah, that's the exact point. Now here, when you get to an edge, you will find that your lace doesn't have enough room to move around, and we're going to make it very easy for ourselves and just snip here on the height of the seam allowance so that we can move it round. So go up 1 centimeter or foot width, whichever you decide to do. It's not really that much of a difference. And then you have enough room to move the lace around. And I'm just going to pin that in. I had a hole there as well, so it was quite easy to open it up on that particular point. And I go to the edge here, and then I do exactly the same. So go up your centimeter or foot width, move the lace around, and then you go all the way up. Leave it standing 1 centimeter over the edge and just cut it. Here I didn't do that. You will see in a minute that I actually let it go round all the way. That's not necessary because don't forget you have the center of the bow wrapping round there, and it makes it unnecessarily thick and nobody sees it anyway. So we can jump this little step. And we're just going to go back down here. And we do exactly the same, up 1 centimeter or foot width. Gauge it as to how much of the lace you want to have left standing. That's the important thing, that the lace all the way around is going to be the same width when the tails are turned. Now comes the cunning little trick I want to show you. And that is we're going to do a stitching line all the way around exactly at the point that we want the lace to show. So for me, in my case, that's just foot width because I want only a tiny little trim bit showing on the side. So that's how you gauge it. So you look at the scalloped edge of your trim and you say, aha, this is exactly perfect. So that's where I'm going to sew. And don't forget to have the needle down when you turn in the fabric and move that little pleat that we've got in the corner out of the way so that you do not catch it. And then we go to the next tip here. And we do exactly the same. We move the needle down into the fabric. You can also reduce the stitch length at that point. I'm going backwards and forwards a couple of times. That's a really tight point, and if you haven't secured that well enough, then that might fray when you start pulling your lace out once you've turned it, so you don't want that. So now I'm going up here, and you won't have all this extra lace stuff there because you've been sensible and you just cut it 1 centimeter longer so that it disappears in the seam allowance and you don't actually add it in. There's no need for that. It just makes it unnecessarily thick. Right, come back down the other side and go to that tip again. Needle down, move the little pleat out of the way, make sure you don't catch it, and come back up the other side. So your eye is on the seam allowance, yes, foot width in my case, but you also have to really watch where you're sewing. So the distance of the scallop to the edge of the fabric is always the same. So what I would suggest is for every beginner, you might want to mark where you're sewing with an invisible marker pen, which disappears afterwards. Now we can remove the pins, turn it over, and you have a perfect stitching line there. That is going to be your guide. Now we're going to put the other layer of the bow on and then turn it. In order not to catch any of those little corner pleats that we've got, I'm tucking them in really well and securing them with a pin. There we go. Beautiful. And once they're secured, I can just take the other bit and place it over the top with the right sides facing each other. So the wrong side is always facing you. And you just put 2 pins into the tails, right into the center, not so close to the seam allowance because we're going to sew over those and we're not going to take them out. So they're staying in. Now I can use my perfect stitch line I already had and sew exactly on it again. And that way I know my lace trim will be perfect. And also fraying is less likely because we have 2 stitching lines going over it. Small stitch length, needle down, press a foot up, turn it, press a foot down. I'd still recommend that where you get to the really sharp tip, which we're doing now, is that you reduce your stitch length to 1.5, if not 1, just so you make absolutely certain that nothing can fray. Turn again and come back up. I think this is a fantastic method to get under your belt, and not just for bows, for anything where it's really important that the lace or piping or whatever you're sewing is the same, and even throughout is to do this holding stitch, and then when you put your facing on or you put the other part of whatever it is you're sewing on, if you sew from the side that has the stitch line on, you know exactly where you're going. So I use this technique when I do piping as well. And one more time. And sew to the end. Lock in your stitches. Now we're going to cut the seam allowance back pretty sharpish. Cut into the corners as well to release the tension, because the seam allowance has to sit on the inside. So it needs more room in this area. I leave about 3 millimeters standing, I would say. 2 to 3 millimeters, really. There we go. And this part here, cut back really sharpish. Now I'm removing my pins. I'm just pushing the pin heads through. I found it too hard to get them out through the turning gap, and I don't think that it damages any fabric, so just push them through. And now we want to turn it from the point furthest away from you. Just tuck a little bit in and then get your thumb under there and push it through. Perfect. Oh, that's beautiful. Look at that. Pull out all the edges and there you go. You will have a perfect trim, and that as a complete beginner possibly. If you're watching this and you never made anything and you thought, well, I'll start with the bows at Frocks and Frolics because they're really easy to make, you have actually learned a technique that you can use in so many other garments as well, and it's very, very good. Look at that, so pretty. All I need to do now is give it a jolly good press as per usual, and my tails are done. We can now move on to the next chapter.